predicted, the Compromise of 1850 satisfied no one. Northerners were especially upset by the fugitive slave law. Under this law, any person arrested as a runaway slave could be jailed with no right to bail or a jury trial. Any citizen who helped a slave escape or who refused to aid in the arrest of a runaway could be fined or jailed as well. The new law was a threat to the thousands of fugitive slaves living in the North. They lived in terror of being arrested and sent back into slavery. Some fled safely into Canada. Others decided to stand and fight. Reverend John Maine McGuinn, a fugitive slave living in New York, said boldly,
"I don't respect this law. I don't fear it. I won't obey it. I will not live like a slave, and if force is employed to re-enslave me, I shall make preparations to meet the crisis as becomes a man."
Opposition to the law was widespread. In Boston, abolitionists posted signs like the one you see here, warning African Americans to avoid all contact with officials who might be working with slave catchers. When slave hunters came to Boston, they were hounded by crowds of angry citizens shouting, "Slave hunters! There go the slave hunters!" After a few days of this, most decided to leave. When a shoemaker named Shadwell was jailed as a runaway, Boston blacks set him free and sent him on his way to Canada. The refusal of Northerners to support the fugitive slave law infuriated slaveholders. It also made enforcement of law almost impossible. Of the tens of thousands of fugitives living in the North, only 299 were captured and returned to their owners during the 1850s. This total was fewer than the number of slaves led to freedom by one small woman, Harriet Tubman. On a wintry Sunday morning in 1851, Harriet Beecher Stowe was sitting in a cold New England church. Suddenly she saw a horrifying vision. Stowe raced home and scribbled down what she had seen. Then she gathered her children around her and read what she had written. At the center of Stowe's vision was a saintly slave known as Uncle Tom. Uncle Tom's master, a cruel plantation owner named Simon Legree, could not bear his slave's goodness. In a moment of rage, Legree had the old slave whipped to death. Just before Uncle Tom slipped away from his broken body, he opened his eyes one last time and whispered to Legree,
"You poor, miserable critter. There ain't no more you can do. I forgive you with all my soul."
When she had finished reading, Stowe's 12-year-old son cried out,
"Oh, Mama, slavery is the cruelest thing in the world."
This touching scene soon became part of a novel written by Stowe called Uncle Tom's Cabin. The novel appeared first as a serial in a weekly newspaper. One week, Stowe's readers shared the pain of Uncle Tom's first owner, a kind slaveholder named Colonel Shelby. Unable to pay his debts, Shelby was forced to sell Uncle Tom away from his family. The cruelty of this action drove Shelby's wife to cry out, "This is God's curse on slavery! I was a fool to think I could make anything good out of such a deadly evil." Another week, terrified readers held their breath when the beautiful young slave Eliza decided to risk death rather than be sold away from her son. Chased by slave hunters, Eliza dashed across the ice-choked Ohio River, clutching her child in her arms. Later still, Stowe's readers found themselves weeping as Uncle Tom met his death at the hands of Simon Legree. By this time, most readers agreed with Stowe's son. Slavery was the cruelest thing in the world. Uncle Tom's Cabin. In 1857, the slavery controversy shifted from the 11th floor of the Congress to the Supreme Court. The court had agreed to consider a case brought by Dred Scott, a Missouri slave who was suing for his freedom. Many years earlier, Scott had traveled with his owner to Wisconsin Territory. Now Scott was arguing that because the Missouri Compromise banned slavery in Wisconsin, his time in that free territory had made him a free man. There were 9 justices sitting on the Supreme Court in 1857, 5 from the South, 4 from the North. The key questions they had to decide were these. Was Dred Scott, a black man and a slave, a citizen of the United States with a right to bring a case in a federal court? And if so, Justice Roger Taney, however, hoped to use his case to settle the controversy over slavery in the territories once and for all. And so he asked the court to consider two more questions. Did Congress have the power under the Constitution to make any laws concerning slavery in the territories? And if it did, was the Missouri Compromise a constitutional use of that power? It's again time for you to assume your historical roles as Northerners